Good day and welcome to Garden Conversations. I'm Jacqueline Kowalski. I'm with the Agriculture and Natural Resource Extension Educator for Cuyahoga County, Ohio State University Extension. I have with me today Jack Gantz, Cuyahoga County Master Gardener Volunteer. And today we're going to talk to you about drip irrigation systems. Some of the things we're going to talk about today are why they're important, why you might want them, what are some of the challenges and successes with drip irrigation, and some of the parts you're going to need, and also why you would use drip irrigation in the first place here in Cuyahoga County. So Jack, are you considering a drip irrigation system?
Oh, I can hardly wait to learn about this. I want to put it in next year.
So this year was a little challenging for gardeners. First we had a tremendous amount of rain, then we had a tremendous amount of drought, and now we're getting into the part of the summer where people just want to go on vacation. They don't want to be sitting out in their gardens watering with a watering can with a hose in 90-degree heat. So drip irrigation is actually a perfect opportunity for folks to kind of not have to do some of those things. One of our challenges here at Ben Franklin Garden is this is our demonstration area for the Master Gardeners. The Master Gardeners maintain this area, however, they're only here a couple days of the week. But plants need to be watered more often. So one of the things that we looked at this year was installing a drip irrigation system. And if you'll take a look behind you, you'll notice that there is a black fabric on top of the soil, but underneath of the black fabric, you're going to see a tube with a blue stripe. Now that tube is actually the drip irrigation system. Now there's a couple of reasons that a person would want to put drip irrigation in. First of all, when we water our plants, we often are watering at the top of the plant. However, that is not the most advantageous place to be watering the plant. What will happen is the water will be on the canopy of the plant, there will be humidity buildup, and sometimes we can get things like fungi, bacteria that can develop on the plant because it is splashing either from the soil up in raindrops or it's floating in the air and then just landing on the plant. So one of the most important things to do with vegetable production is keeping water off the foliage. Now, of course, plants do need a lot of water, particularly vegetables, particularly in August. So we are then putting the drip irrigation underneath so that the drip irrigation is dripping exactly at the root zone where the plant's going to need it. So the water comes out of the tube through an emitter, and then it comes out right at the root zone. So over time, what will happen is you turn the system on, 15 minutes, the water drips, it then goes through the soil profile, it slightly expands, but it's mostly going exactly to the roots where the roots are taking up the water. Plants very rarely take up water through the leaves. It's actually mostly through the root system, which I think some people just aren't generally aware of. So that's one of the best advantages, is that you're getting the water exactly where you need it to be. Another advantage is if you're using a hose to water, you're spraying water everywhere. So you're not exactly getting water on the plant, but you're getting it on this bare soil. Once you get it on the bare soil, what happens?
Well, you promote growth of weeds.
Exactly. So the minute that weeds get a little bit of moisture, they start, bam, germinating. So therefore, you're not just watering your plant, you're watering the weeds. And we don't necessarily want to water the weeds. We don't want weeds to grow at all. So that's another advantage to having the landscape fabric, is that area where the water is coming out of the drip hose is covered. Therefore, weeds cannot germinate through that landscape fabric. The other thing is basically you're saving water, which might be saving you money if you're paying for your water, because you're not using as much water as you would be if you were just spraying it. Most of that water is evaporating, most of it's not hitting the target, so therefore you're losing it, throwing your money away. Another reason you might want to use drip irrigation is just to save yourself some extra time. Now, when it gets to be this time of year and it's quite hot and we don't want to be outside as much, we can turn on that drip irrigation, and I wouldn't say walk away, because I would never walk away from drip irrigation, because you never know what could happen. There might be a little hole somewhere. However, you won't have to be bending down, dragging hoses around. You turn it on, you observe it, make sure water's coming out where it needs to be, make sure it's not coming out where it shouldn't be, and make sure that you're doing that, saving your back and saving yourself some time. So we're going to talk about some of the parts that are necessary for drip irrigation. So let's go over to this part of the field. So one of the first things you want to make sure of is that you have a backflow preventer on your water source. Now if you're in your home or at an apartment, oftentimes that's already on the water system someplace within your plumbing. However, if you are going to be watering at, say, a community garden, you're going to have to make sure that you have a backflow preventer someplace on your system. Here, I just put it on the spigot right here so that I know that it's there, I know that it's not leaking, nothing unusual is happening with it. What that's doing is making sure that water that's in the system is not then being pulled back into the municipal water system and contaminating the water. What I'm also going to look at is the pressure of the water that's coming out of the spigot. Now, these lines, I wouldn't say that they're fragile, but they certainly are susceptible to being overly pressured. So the first thing I'm going to do is use a pressure meter to look at what the pressure of the water is that's coming out of this pipe. It's a very simple tool. You can get it at a hardware store. So basically, I turn the water on. The pressure meter says that it is about 72 psi. Now that is going to be just too high of a pressure for these lines because they're made of plastic type materials to be able to hold up to. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use a pressure regulator. So this pressure regulator takes the pressure of the water that's coming out of this pipe, which is about 72 psi, down to 10 psi. I'm going to screw this in. I'm going to make sure that it's going the right way. I know that sounds intuitive, but sometimes it's very easy to connect them on backwards. So I'm going to make sure the flow is going outward. And then I'm going to hook up this hose. This hose is going to be taking me to my header line, which is right over there in the corner. So basically I have all this on. I think it's on tight. I'm pretty sure there'll probably be a leak once I turn it on. And there is a slight leak here and a slight leak there. So I'm just going to try and tighten them up a little bit. What this is doing, this water is taking this down to this header, which is buried underneath the ground. And this header is going to be going straight underground here, all the way down this row. And there is a feeder line at each row of plants. So there's a feeder line there. There's a feeder line here, which you can see. There's a feeder line here. And at the plant, you can see that the line has had an emitter put in it right there. The water is coming out right at that plant. But I know that that is the only place that the water is coming out at. So this is a perfectly set up system for this particular use. Now, not everybody is going to make theirs like this. Sometimes you won't have the need to bury it. They chose to bury it because they didn't want folks to be tripping over it because there's a lot of people in this area. And sometimes you want it on top of the ground so that you can make sure there aren't any leaks or there aren't any holes or rabbits didn't chew on them or so on and so forth. So we're going to go over here and we're going to figure out how we're going to put together a irrigation system ourselves. So as I had mentioned, there's a lot of different options you have available for the things that you would use to put together your drip irrigation system. First of all, you want to make a choice on what your feeder lines are going to be. And these are the feeder lines, and like we had showed you underneath there. Now these are two different types of materials that are being used. First, what I have in my hand is what we call drip tape. Drip tape's a rather thin material. It can be anywhere from 6 mil to about 12 mil. In fact, it might not even be some of those thinner ones on the market any longer, but they were when I first started my career. And what this is, it's a tube that has slits cut in the tube at different intervals. This one appears to be about a 12-inch spacing on it. It comes in many different spacings. It can be 6-inch, 8-inch, 12-inch, 18-inch, 24-inch, 36-inch. So it's basically you purchase it based on what your needs are. You can buy it in these really large rolls, about 1,000 feet. Most people don't need that. Or you can buy it in much smaller rolls. Another material that you can use is this polytubing. And once again, you can see these emitters are built in. You have these nice holes where the water is going to come out. Once again, they're spaced at different intervals. This one is, I believe, about a 6-inch or maybe an 8-inch. There, there, there. So basically, this is a much stronger material than this is. This can last you a number of years, as long as you don't hit it with the weed eater, as long as you don't drag it with some sort of lawnmower, which I've done both of those. And this will not last you as long. Now the price difference on the drip tape as compared to the poly hose is very, very different. This is a much less expensive material, but it's one of those things that you kind of weigh the balance on. You can put in a higher upfront cost, it'll last longer. There's a little bit less flexibility with this type of system, but you can certainly work around that. Another thing you can purchase is the tubing that doesn't have any emitters, so that you can put the emitters in at the spaces that you need them. So for your landscaping, this might be a perfect option because you might be running it across a long space that doesn't have any plants. You don't want water there, so you just want the emitters where you need them to be. Yeah. If you choose something like this, you have a tremendous amount of options within emitters. We have the emitter bubblers like we saw over there, and that's this sort of emitter here. The water just basically bubbles out the top. You have these types of emitters, which are fan emitters. There's a little nozzle on the top. This might be a 160-degree fan. It might be a 270-degree fan, just depending what your needs might be. And then we have this type of emitter, which is basically an on-off emitter. There's not a lot of flexibility in how much water is coming out there. But there are tons of types of emitters on the market that you can choose exactly what you need. For vineyards, there's a different type of emitter. For orchards, there's a different type of emitter. Once again, it just depends what your needs are. For the garden, I tend to use either drip tape or the hose that has the emitters in it already, just because that's easiest for me. But you might make another different sort of choice. So right here we have this bed that was finished out for the season, but it's still pretty early. It's still only August, so we need to put something in here. I also know that I probably will not spend a lot of time watering, so I want to put in a drip irrigation system. What I've done is I've cut my lines as long as the bed is. I've taken a piece of main tubing. I put an end cap on it, and this is called an end cap. It means it's the end, nothing's going to come out. I've cut it as long as my bed is going to be. And I've also found these connectors. Now, what I like about these type of connectors are the on-off. So, for example, I'm going to plant this line, but I won't plant this line. I can just turn this line right off. And they're very easy connected. All I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this end in here. I'm going to squeeze it up and twist it up, and then I'm going to roll this knob down, twist it down so it's nice and tight. I can't pull it out like that. So, and then I'll have to untwist it from there. But wait a second, how can I get this connected to this? I still have to make some sort of hole to get this barb, and that's the barb, end into this. So I'm going to use this tool. This is one of the hole punchers that can be used to punch holes into the lines so that you can insert either a barb from a piece of one of these shutoff valves or one of the emitters themselves. And they come in all shapes and sizes. This just happens to be the one that I have with me today. I am going to make my hole on this blue line, and most of the hosing that you purchase is going to have a different color to it, and that kind of designates what company it's being purchased from. And so the other reason to have the line on the tube is to make sure you keep all of your holes straight, because what happens is this tubing likes to twist as it gets hot. As it cools off, it twists another way. So by keeping it there, I make sure I have it in the right place. And usually it happens a lot faster and easier than this. So I've made my hole. It's pretty small, but what I want to make sure I don't do is use the tool to go all the way through the other side of the wall, because then I have a hole on the other side and a big old leak. So from there, what I then do is twist this in. I don't think that's big enough. So make it a little bit bigger, and it just snaps right on. Did you hear that snap? Yeah. Okay. And I'm not going to pin it down yet because I have this other one I have to put on. So I'm now going to make another hole here. Okay, and there we go. But I also need a way for the end of this tube to hook up to my hose. So what I'm going to use is this part. I'm going to push it on there and then screw it down like that. And then I'll easily be able to take my hose and screw it on to the top here. Okay, so let's pin it down. Oops. And here are a few pins for you. Okay. And I actually also put some pins in the middle sometimes, just to keep the lines straight. Okay, and let's take a look at the ends. Now there's a lot of different parts you can get to secure the ends. There are these little, similar to the top, these little gadgets called end caps you can use. There are also these little figure 8 things you can use. But if you're in a tight spot, just cut a piece of the hose or the drip tape about that big, fold the end over, and stick it in there. And it'll hold temporarily. I wouldn't say it's going to hold forever, but like I said, if that's your option at the time, that'll work just fine. So voila, we have our drip irrigation system. Let's turn it on. I do anticipate a few leaks here and there, but that's the purpose for testing it out. Make sure we get those taken care of. Okay, Jack, can you go ahead and turn that on? Okay, so all of a sudden now I see the lines pressurizing, and you can see the water dripping out of the emitter. And if I turn this off, or if I turned it that way, the water will stop. So that's helpful if I'm not ready to plant one of these two lines. As you can see, there is a lot of pressure going into these lines. We do have a few leaks at the end. As I had mentioned, that would be like a temporary stop. There are other things you can purchase to use as end caps. But as you can see, this is pretty helpful as a whole. Now, how much water comes out? Well, it depends on the pressure, and it depends on the type of emitter that you're using. The type of emitter that you're using, when you purchase it, it'll say whether it's a 1 gallon per hour, quarter gallon per hour, half gallon per hour. That way you can really determine how much water you need to add. Say you've had 2 inches of rain for the week, well, you may not have to use a drip irrigation at all. Say you haven't had any water for 2 weeks, then of course you're going to want to make sure that you are putting on as much water as that particular plant's need. Of course, tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, things of those nature need a lot of water this time of year. Well, there's other vegetables that don't need as much. If you're also in a situation where you need to make a turn in your system, this is an elbow. So basically you can make a 90-degree turn to help you maneuver your lines around the garden so that folks aren't tripping on them. Do you have any questions on the drip irrigation?
No, that's just great. It's dripping exactly where you want it to drip. I'm looking forward to putting this in next year and saving myself watering.
Yes, I can honestly say it saved me a lot
Oh,
of
yeah.
time over the course of my career.
And it seems so easy.
It is very easy. Now, where do you get drip irrigation materials? There are many, many companies that sell them. There are some companies locally, there are some companies nationally, but you can just Google drip irrigation Ohio, drip irrigation wherever, and something will pop up, and take a look at it, compare prices, compare systems. Oftentimes you don't need to buy the parts individually. You can just buy a kit that will serve your needs. But just take some time and research what's available and figure out what will best suit you.
That looks like fun.
Sometimes.
Hey Jacqueline, we got a number of calls on our hotline, and this lady called in and said she has groundhogs. How do you get rid of groundhogs?
Oh gosh, I have groundhogs too. Besides becoming friends with them, there's a couple of things that you can do. First of all, remember within the city limits you can trap them, and you can also rent a trap from the Humane Services. However, what you have to remember is you have to have them come pick up the animal. They will relocate the animal. Relocating groundhogs is something that you have to be very cautious of. You cannot relocate them on government property, under privately owned lands. If you put them on privately owned lands, you have to have permission of the homeowner. So groundhogs, yes, are very problematic in the city and in the country for sure. They tunnel. You know where their tunnel is, but you don't know. They could have several exit holes that you don't know about and that are blocks and blocks away. So basically, our options here within the city are trapping. In rural areas, there are other options folks have if they have the proper licensing.
And we had another question that I found difficult to answer. Lady is a rose gardener, and this year the leaves in the roses were very small and they look like mutants, all twisted. What do we tell her for that?
So that's an interesting question. So right off the top of my head, if I were just to picture this, I would think, wow, that sounds like herbicide damage. It sounds like 2,4-D. It sounds like different glyphosate. Could be a couple things. However, we always have to remember there could be other things that we are not thinking of. What stands out to me in this particular situation is rosette disease, which is a viral disease that's affecting roses that has been very problematic in this area of the state for the last several years. And what happens is the roses that look like they've been beautiful for years, all of a sudden start getting these really distorted, stunted, very, very thorny thorns. Just don't look happy. They look sick. Their color's reddish rather than being our normal rose colors. And it's a viral disease that's spread by an aerophoid mite. The problem is once you have rosette disease in that rose, the rose will not recover. It must be removed. Not only does the plant have to be removed, every little root and little twig about the rose needs to go. Because while the virus can't just survive in the soil, it can survive in any plant tissue that's still living. So what can that person do for that particular bush if it is indeed rosette disease? Because I haven't seen it, I can't say for certain that's what it is, but that would be one of my choices that I would present to the gardener. Total removal. What do they do in the future? Well, first thing, make sure that you get clean planting stock. Go to a reputable nursery and ask them if they have had this problem, if they're aware of the problem. They say no, take the stock home, plant it. Try to plant them as far apart from other plants so that the leaves will not touch each other. Also try and make sure you go around your yard and your land perimeter to make sure that any multiflora rose is removed. Multiflora rose is an invasive species that many of us have in our landscapes. It also is affected by the rosette disease. So I guess there's that benefit that it's killing out the multiflora rose, but still affecting a lot of our prized roses. Yeah. So really sanitation. And also make sure if you are cutting If you're using your instrument to cut that rose out, that you do sterilize that and you do not use it on another rose plant, because you want to make sure that you spread the virus yourself. So, well, thank you, Jack. Those are some interesting questions for the week. So to wrap up for today, we talked about drip irrigation systems for our home gardens. Now, the advantage to having drip irrigation system is that you're putting water exactly where it needs to be, right on the roots of the plant. You're avoiding getting water on the foliage, therefore hoping to avoid fungal and bacterial diseases that could happen on the foliage. Another thing, you also might be saving some money by not applying as much water. It also saves you some time because the water is going exactly where it needs to be. We talked about some of the basic parts of the drip irrigation system. First, we mentioned that you need to put on a backflow valve if you're in a community setting so that water isn't going back into the municipal system. If you're in a home setting, usually that's already on your plumbing system at some place. We also then talked about a pressure regulator, which will then take the pressure of the water that's coming out of the pipe down into the drip hosing to a much, much lower pressure that the hoses can tolerate. We then talked about our header tubing, which is going to be tubing at the top of the drip irrigation system. And then we talked about the feeder lines, which are the lines that come off the header. We talked about different options for our feeder tubes, whether they be drip tube, whether they be a poly, or whether they be a poly with emitters. We also talked about the different emitters that are available to you, and we talked about the different parts that are needed. Jack mentioned he's looking forward to having a drip irrigation system in his garden next year, and I'm pleased to hear that. Thank you for joining us this day for this segment of Gardening Conversations. We'd like to thank the Old Brooklyn Development Corporation for their support of the Ben Franklin Community Gardens. We'd also like to thank the volunteers of Cuyahoga County who maintain the demonstration areas here and for making it such an asset to our county and city.